All right. I think that should have done it. I think. I have one slight problem over here. I think I am transmitting audio, but now I've got audio coming back to me. That should have done it. I think. Never mind. I know what's going on. There we go. Hi, everyone. Hey. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Chaos. Thank you, Torsten. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Belton Brosger, Tyler, Milosh. Good to see everyone over here. It's fantastic. I do have a slight echo, but I can kind of work through it. I don't know if I actually can fix this. I've not had this issue before, where I've got something coming back to me over the headphones, but maybe I can just get rid of my headphones altogether and fly loose. Is the volume a little low? All right. Okay, here we go. I think that should be good as far as the volume. Technical issues abound, but they're not going to stop us. Good morning, Sleepy Reader. Good to see you here. Good to see everyone. I've just gotten rid of my headphones, which is... Oh, okay, I think the volume's a little too high over there. All right, finally. Okay, well, I wasn't expecting all of those things, but it's good to see everyone here. Thanks for putting up with all of this nonsense. Brian Cavon, yes, I think Gore Vidal, you're quite right. It is Brian Cavon to blame for everything, all of the ills in the world. The volume's working fine now. Good to know. Thank you very much. And welcome everyone to this live stream. I had this wonderful monologue that I opened with. It was one for the ages, but the audio wasn't working and now it's gone forever. So I'll have to stutter and stammer through a second take, which is not going to replicate the brilliance of the original. But it's very nice to see everyone here. What I was saying when the audio wasn't working at least included Happy New Year, a very Happy New Year to everyone. I hope that this is going to be a great year. I was also pontificating a little bit about how the last year seems to have gone by in a blur. I really can't remember one month distinct from the other. And I think many other people might be in the same boat. I'm hoping that this year has a little bit more variation, a little bit more something different, something new. But the reason why we're all here, the reason for this live stream is that there was at least, some shimmering, glimmering little bits of hope and wonder. And for me, like many years, it did come through some of the books that I read. And I know that a lot of people, and I've watched a lot of people's videos, a lot of people have been talking about their favorite reads of 2021, the top books of 2021. And I really wanted to join in that conversation as well. But it'll surprise no one who's been watching this channel for a while. I had a lot of trouble with that. I had a lot of trouble figuring out how to talk about the best books of the year, primarily because I always have trouble ranking. But even if I wasn't ranking, selecting 10 books or selecting 20 books or even selecting 50 books, it's always a difficult thing for me. But there were definitely highlights. There were definitely things that I'm still thinking about, even though I may have read them in January or February, and definitely things that I've recently read that have stuck in my mind. And I did want to talk about them, but I was trying to figure out what a good way would be to talk about those. Well, yes, Happy New Year 2022 is spelled 2022. Yes, I've seen that before. I mean, 2020 was no great shakes either. 2021, I really can't decide which one was worse. But comics, the way I was trying to think about the comics that I had read, I realized that I could create some separate categories for myself for all the comics that I had read, comics that I had enjoyed, and comics that I was thinking about. And some years ago, I think it was at the end of 2018, which is the only time I've made a video like this. I had made a video about my favorite reads of 2018, or the comics that I loved reading the most in 2018, and I'd created categories in that video, like best superhero comic and best continuing series, best new series, things like that, as far as my reading was concerned. And one of the categories that I had created for that video was best hat trick. And that year I was talking about Shabute, I was talking about Park Bench, Alone, and Moby Dick, which were 3 books that I read in the same year. It's because I discovered Shabute, and so I started with Park Bench, which I thought was fantastic. I read Alone after that, which I thought was fantastic. I mean, there's debate amongst some of us who are fans of those works of which one is the better work, and some people are, it's definitely Park Bench and Alone doesn't come close, and other people are like, Alone is, you know, something really meaty and significant, and Park Bench is great. But and I can see both sides, I can see both arguments. And the third book was Moby Dick, which is also a fantastic book. I wouldn't put it at the same level as those 2 other books, but that's what happens when you read a creator sort of back to back, or not even if you're reading other works, if you're reading works by the same creator in close proximity to each other, and perhaps even if they're not in proximity to each other, the readings, there is a tendency to compare. And now I don't like necessarily comparing works of art, but I don't like comparing works by different people unless I'm talking about a very specific comparison. If I'm talking about one particular element I want to compare, but within the same creator, I love comparing because it really, to me, it's fascinating how one person or one collaboration can create such differing works, how something can be so successful, something less so, or you can see themes, you can see motifs. It's just something that I enjoy doing, and it happens specifically for me when I go on these little mini marathons, little benders on a particular creator, which is also something that I love doing. I love excavating a person whom I've just discovered, and then reading a lot of stuff by them, seeing what else there is out there, seeing what else people are talking about, what I can get my hands on, what's available, what's affordable, and putting it all together as a sort of study of their body of work. And I've done this ever since I got back into reading comics as, you know, an adult, as you know, the phase that I'm in now. I don't think I did it as a kid. That was more about whatever you find, whatever you can get your hands on. It would work out that way for people like Hergé or Goscinny and Uderzo, because they had a series of books and you were reading Tintin or you were reading Asterix. So that you had, but otherwise, as a kid, it was difficult to do. As an adult, you can do it. And that's also a reason why I really enjoy looking at older works, or people who've been creating comics for decades and I'm just now finding out about them, which happened a lot when I was first getting into comics because I had not read anything. So anything that was mentioned by anyone was a brand new rabbit hole to be explored. And I still find that to be the case. I still find me discovering people and then looking and saying, wow, look at that back catalog. Look at how much they have out there already that I can read. How exciting. There's so much stuff that even if you don't like this thing, you can find another thing. So that part of it has always been part of comics reading for me, always been as an adult part of comics reading for me, that discovery, but also that marathoning, the one after the other of the same creator. It happened with Jason, it happened with Richard Sala, it happened with Rick Geary. How fascinating to find, like, there's 30 books out there that you can go and get if you're interested. That's the stuff that sometimes the brand new work and the brand new creators create a certain frustration, the best kind of frustration, when you finish something and you're like, what else is that? Oh, I've got to now wait, as Gore Vidal is waiting for the return of Saga. So that's the kind of stuff that going back, finding people that you didn't know about, finding classic comics, finding historically significant and talked about things, is so interesting, not just because of that one work itself, but what else has that person done. And so I thought that hat trick sort of thing that happened with Shabute and what's happened before, that's something that I would think about as a category for this year, is what occurred to me. So what I want to talk about today are books that are part of discovering a creator for me. Most of these creators are well known and have been around for a while. And also, when I look at these books and when I look at these lists of books, I definitely want to make deeper dive videos on each of these creators. So I don't think this particular live stream is going to be me talking about them in a lot of depth. It's more that autobiographical aspect of finding people, seeing what happens when you read a couple of their books one after the other, what kind of comparisons you make, where that fits into what we know about comics and what we know about creators. How do you plug in a discovery into your repertoire or into your knowledge? Those are the kind of things that I find very interesting, because they're absolutely unique from person to person. There's just no way that two people can have exactly the same. I mean, Building Stories, which has 14 books, has over 3 million ways of reading it, just in 14 books. So I don't know if it's 3 million, it's a lot. It's probably more. But so if that's with 14 books, what about with every book there is out there? It's just impossible. So that autobiographical aspect of it, to me, is as interesting in some ways as the works themselves, as I think a lot of the stuff I talk about on this channel is. It's so much about how do we react to those stories that we read, to the works that we encounter, which is something I've learned more and more about as I've had this channel, when I've seen people's comments, when I've seen people's chats and things like that, where they talk about, I was this old when I read this, and this was the first Tintin I read, and this was my introduction to the X-Men, and this is how I first learned about Eddie Campbell. Whatever it is very, very interesting, is very fascinating. So I always like conversations. I always like conversations like that. Oh, good to see everyone who's joining the chat. Happy New Year to everyone, in case you missed the Happy New Year right at the beginning. It's very good. It's very fun to see everyone over here. And yeah, I think we can get started, unless there were any particular questions that I needed to attend, or if there's something that's wrong with the light or the sound or something like that. Thanks for letting me know about the technical problems right at the beginning. I know I'm in a bit of a lag over here. So the 4 creators I discovered, and actually there should be 5 or 6. There are a couple of others, but I only read 2 books by them, or I only read 1 book by them. For example, Manuel Fior is someone I had read 5,000 kilometers a second many years ago, and I mean, that book really impressed me, but I never looked him up or saw if there was anything else that was easily available until a friend pointed out a number of books that they were reading, and that was interesting. And I just started hearing about Celestia, which was a book that was being published in this year. So I read Ultramarine, but that's only 2, and one of them was a long time ago, and I know that there are a couple more out there that I want to get, so I can't include them in this live stream because there's not enough that I've read. So I'm looking forward to continuing delving into certain other creators. And there are also old favorites. who had new books out, not necessarily in 2021, but I read them in 2021, and these are old favorites on whom I've made videos. So there was a new book by Jason, there was the last book by Richard Sara, there was a new book by Box Browns. These are things that I think I might do another video on. I don't know if it'll be live or not, but sort of new books by old favorites or something like that. But today I want to talk about new favorites, people I hadn't known about before. I mean, maybe hadn't known about isn't right. I'd obviously heard their names and knew a little bit about, but I hadn't read their works very concretely. And in some cases, I was surprised to find that there have been books out there for a while that I could have gotten my hands on. So why didn't I is another one of those questions that comes over here right now. So let's get started. So I'll name the 4 creators, although if you've seen some of the pictures and everything, you've probably already figured them out. So this year, as far as multiple reads by the same creator leading to this wonderful journey of discovery, I have Paco Roca, I have Alberto Breccia, I have Simon Hanselmann, and John Porcellino. These are all fantastic comics creators across different, not just periods of time, but different geographies and with different styles and different. So nothing actually connects them, or there's no logical reason to put them together apart from the fact that they're all comics creators and they're all people I dived into in a big way. Okay, we are going to start with Paco Roca, who was, and as usual, I'll set up a parameter and immediately I'll cheat, where like these are people I'd not read before, but I had read Paco Roca before. I'd read Wrinkles, and I'd read Wrinkles several years ago. I loved it. I thought it was one of the most heartbreaking works, which could also be funny in a very genuine way. And the art style is absolutely captivating, but it's the full story of how this cartoonish art, these beautiful colors, are put together to tell a story of aging and decrepitude, Alzheimer's and mental degradation. And it's not what you would think of as cheerful subject matter, but the manner in which Wrinkles was able to balance the light touch with the pathos, the humor, the at times absolutely laugh out loud humor at things that were instantly on the next page, on the next panel, absolutely heartbreaking. It was, to me, a kind of a revelatory work. I've often thought about what other works there are like this. Ross Chast has a book called Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant, about her parents aging. And that's a pretty good one too. It's very funny. It's very funny, but it's also very painful and very recognizable. And although very different in many other ways, that and Wrinkles would make a great 1-2 punch. There are comics like that. I think we've talked about things like, well, now I'm going to draw a blank for that exact touch. I think there are some fantasy comics or some more genre comics that I've seen. Heck by Xander Cannon is one that comes to mind, that are very funny, and then wow, that was a gut punch. But this is not that kind of thing. We're not talking about something that feels like a light, humorous adventure and then delivers an emotional impact. It's just there from the very beginning, that combination of losing yourself, forgetting where you are, and that sort of disarming humor, poetry, and attachment to life that comes out of examining that. So that was Wrinkles, and it created this phenomenal impression on me. And Paco Roca, that's the only thing. And this is the paperback edition from Knockabout. I realized some years later that there is now a hardcover edition of this from Fantagraphics. I was in a bookstore and I found it. In fact, that bookstore trip is on video. So I made a video about going to this bookstore. I think I've referred to that video a couple of times, and I discovered in that trip that Wrinkles has a hardcover. But I mean, I would be lying if I said I wasn't tempted to get it, because I love this story so much. But this is just it's a wonderful story no matter which format you read it in, and it blew me away. So I was primed for more Paco Roca. I was ready, but for some reason, as I was saying at the top of this live stream, for some reason I didn't read any other works of his. Maybe I forgot to look him up, or at the time I looked him up, the books weren't available. When I came back to like, hey, what about other Paco Roca books, which happened in early 2021? I was like, oh look, there are a couple of them out there. I didn't know about these, and I think some of these are relatively new, but some of these are from 2018. Maybe one of them is from 2020. You would think I would do the research for this particular live stream and see if any of them were published in 2021. But the next book I read was The House, brought out by Fantagraphics. And I think what Fantagraphics is doing now is publishing Paco Roca, because everything else I have over here is also from, well, with one exception. So The House was the next book I read. This is a family dramedy, I guess is the word. So again, a very it's a mix of pathos and humor. This feels very much like, well, you can see the art style. Also, it's a very pleasing layout. I really like being able to read a comic in this format from time to time. There's something about the way the turning of the pages even is affected, and you're able to get a particular type of layout and panel design that I think makes, if you know how to manipulate it, if you know how to do it, which I think Paco Roca succeeds with this book, is a very pleasing experience. Oh, whoa, there's an interesting comment here. I think the spine of Wrinkles reads different. Yes, very good. This one, I've often wondered about it. The spine over... Oh, this is not going to show up, is it? Wait, hold on. Can I do this like this? That's not going to help. All right, so let me... There we go. It's almost... No, do it. Okay, well, anyway, it says rides. It does not say Wrinkles. You do see the cover over here. It's thinking you're on the Orient Express in the middle of the 19th century, etc. A lot of this is about journeys, etc. So Paco Roca's spine saying rides is indeed, I believe, a nod to forgetting things, which the story is about. Very, very cool. Now I know why it says rides. But The House is... one way of looking at it is, if you see any of those, watch any of those 90s indie movies, when Sundance Film Festival really became big, and a lot of people were making these family dramas about people coming together for Thanksgiving or something like that. Or I mean, the first movie I remember watching something like that was The Big Chill, about a bunch of people from... Was it high school? I think it was high school coming together for the funeral of one of their friends. But you had a lot of these ensemble movies of people coming together. Sometimes they were family, sometimes it was a high school reunion. And that continued for a while. And that's a particular type of storytelling about old wounds and baggage that you carry, and what have you done with your life until you come back for this. And we've seen this happen in a lot of novels and movies. And The House, on the plot level at least, it feels like that. It is a number of siblings and their significant others coming together to the house where their father lived, and remembering things and then interacting with each other. And it's a gentle story. It's kind of what you would expect, as far as you're not suddenly going to have a meteorite crash or dinosaurs rampage through the thing. You know what the story is going to be like, I think. And the story doesn't really surprise you or try to put in any twists and turns, and I particularly like that it doesn't try to do anything like a deep, dark, buried secret that comes out. I think there might be a temptation for people when you do this kind of setup, when you have that kind of character interaction, and the house avoids, I believe, most of the sentimental manipulation, and it substitutes instead for quiet moments, genuine conversations, things that feel quite honest. They're not written like poetry, but they feel true. So I thought it was a great story. It didn't affect me in the same way as Wrinkles did. But maybe that's just because the subject matter in Wrinkles is so easy, to feel empathetic to or sympathize with, and this one it can depend on how each of these characters feels to you. But the artwork is beautiful, the colors are lovely in this muted pastel way. As I said, the format and the layout of it, all of this helps pace the story out in such a way that feels gentle, that feels true and real, and even though it's not pyrotechnical, it feels completely worthwhile. So this was my second Paco Roca book, and I was in a good mood because so far, so good. Next, I picked up, and actually I ordered one of these books after that, but that order got cancelled, and then I had to wait until another copy became available. So the one that arrived next was The Winter of the Cartoonist, also published by Fantagraphics in a handsome, slim hardcover, which people who've been watching this channel for a while will know how much I love a slim hardcover. And once again, you have these clean, spare lines. You've got this lovely panel work, wonderful colors. And this was, well, there's two aspects to this story, and this is where the autobiography part thing comes in. One is, what did I expect the story to be about, and what was the story? Now, in most cases, I don't really know much about books that I'm getting, but in some cases, it's almost unavoidable, or the reason why you're interested in something is because someone had a review on it, or someone made a video on it, and that piqued your interest. So, but you got some information, and if you haven't put enough time between learning that and ordering the book and reading it, it'll still be fresh in your mind, which is one of the reasons why I also like to wait for a long time to pass, so that I can forget. I remember that there was a positive review. I remember that XY, really liked it, but I've kind of forgotten what they liked about it. I've forgotten what it was that they mentioned about the plot, and now I can get into it without anything spoiling my head. In the case of The Winter of the Cartoonist, I think there was now I'm in the situation in which, will I spoil it for you? So I knew a little bit about The Winter of the Cartoonist, where I knew a little bit about the setup, which is 4 of Spain's top cartoonists leave the publisher and start their own publisher. That's about what I knew. Now, even that little, unfortunately, created in my mind an expectation that the story would be about these young genius upstarts or something like that, something along the Image Comics Foundation, or people striking out on their own. But what I didn't realize is this book is not really interested in a sort of Hollywood telling of the story. It, in fact, flips it around, and you start at the end, so you kind of know where it's headed, which immediately was just like, well, okay, so if this is where the story is going to start, that means I'm going to see what happened to get here, which is not what I thought I was going to be getting. But even more than that, Winter of the Cartoonist is a very and now that word is just going to get used for all of Paco Roca's works. It's a very gentle book, and by that I don't mean it's soft. It's pretty harsh in some ways, but its depiction is in the mundane things of real life. It's people sitting around and talking. It's people smoking. Man, there's a lot of smoking in this, but that's to be expected. They're drinking coffee. They're eating at cafes. It's the nuts and bolts of putting things together, and it's their ideas and their thoughts. And in some ways, it's not as much an elegy as say something like Clyde Fans is, but it's got a little bit of that melancholy, especially because of its period setup and how it's looking at a particular point in history where politics and the war and what's been going on in the country for the last couple of decades really plays a role, but in the background, in the formation of things like that. There is, I think, for people who know comics history, and particularly people who know about the cartoonists and the comics artists that this book is about, for those people, I think there'll be an even greater layer to the story where it's that whole thing of how you are going to be crushed and how the industry is not going to care about art and it's not going to care about visionary work. And while that is there, that's not really the crushing feeling, or that's not the overwhelming sensation that I was left with, because I don't know the history, because I don't know these people. I thought that Paco Roca was interested in the people and their ideas more than about the historical significance of what they did or the moral that you can draw from the story. And at it's like, what, 110, 120 pages? Yeah, it's about 120 pages. So at 120 pages, it's actually quite slim. So it's not an epic... It's not an expose. It's not a historical excavation, although there is a phenomenal amount of research involved in this, as there is in, I think, a lot of the stuff that Paco Roca works on. But it's a slight book. I mean that only from the point of view of how many pages it is, not from its impact. So maybe if it was a 300-page sort of spanning decades by spending a lot of time on each and every phase of these people's lives, it would be a completely different book, and maybe it would be more along the lines of what makes a Hollywood movie. So this one, when I say that The House might be an indie movie, etc., The Winter of the Cartoonist is kind of an anti-movie. This is not the kind of stuff that not in the way that it's presented here. This is not a blockbuster Hollywood sort of approach. It might be, now that I'm thinking about Hollywood, it might be something like Zodiac by David Fincher, without the violence, because it's very procedural and it's very much about the mundane procedures of getting things done and the ideas being put in a way that sounds, again, just like the other books, like it's real. So I thought it was a really good book. I think you've got to sort of not get at it as like, oh, this is going to be like Spain's Jack Kirby story or something like that. You can't have those kind of expectations. It's a different story. It's about a different context, and the way that Paco Roca has chosen to tell this story is different. So yeah, but still very worthwhile. And the last book that, well, not last, but the pièce de résistance, I guess, is Twists of Fate, which is just it's a spectacular book. I loved it. I think people have comparisons, but they will compare, I think, most things on the most superficial ways. So, for example, if you have a World War II story. And if that World War II story is being given to you in the form of an interview, and if that interview is with a crotchety old man being conducted by a young man, people are just going to start talking about Mouse and compare it to Mouse. And I mean, I think that's unfortunate. I understand why. But I'm glad that I never heard anyone say, oh, you should read Twists of Fate because it's like Mouse, because that would have been disastrous. It's its own thing. And I think it's look at the interview process. So of course you've got the war and you've got the atrocities of war in this style, which is very pleasing, but also quite clear about what you're seeing. But it's not there's violence, of course, but it's not grungy necessarily, but it's still direct. You still get what's happening. It hits you. But really what hits you is sometimes where you have sequences with no narrative text, with no text at all, or just a couple of spoken words, and you just have these long sequences continue until you get to the end of the chapter or the end of the section, and you come back to the interview, and then the interview has really all of the text, all of the words. And that balance, I thought, was really well done, because sometimes, of course, the interview's language would bleed into what you're seeing as far as the past is concerned. And one phrase or one little sentence would be enough to hollow me out. I was just like, that is really good. That is really good placement of what the old man is saying to the scene that we are seeing. It's the kind of stuff that comics are so good at doing, and this book really has some fantastic examples of that. As I said, I'm pretty sure talk about all of these in much greater detail, or at least with more substance than I'm doing right now. But I thought Twists of Fate was great. In fact, Twists of Fate, Winter of the Cartoonist, The House, and Wrinkles are all recommended. If you don't like one, you will find something to like in the other one. And the last one I wanted to mention is it's a fourth book by Paco Roca, which is one I ordered, and it got cancelled because I think it's out of print, or I don't know. It was difficult to find, and then suddenly it wasn't difficult to find, and I got it. So this is The Lighthouse. This is published a little, so this is not from Fantagraphics, and it wasn't, I think it was published in 2017 or 2018, and it is very slim, slim hardcovers. But The Lighthouse is a World War I story, and it feels like a fable or parable, maybe. It's very hard-hitting as far as the war stuff is concerned, but again, without being gratuitous, without being exploitative. It sets that up, and then you get, this soldier running away from the First World War. This is now the Second World War. Finds himself in a lighthouse. It's a short story, and I loved it. It's a very different, not just because of the colors, as you can see over here. It's a different style almost. It's recognizable as Paco Roca, but it isn't as immediately striking. I think it might be an earlier work, even though it says 2017, or he's definitely worked in a purposely different style to tell the story, which as a short story, I love short stories in comics, and I love having short stories be their own little volume. I think it's a unique experience, and when it gets put in an anthology, I'm very happy that it's there in an anthology. I'm very happy, especially if I didn't have the original one, and it's a good way to pick up things and get a survey of people. But there's just a distinct pleasure in having something begin and end and just be what it needs to be in your hands as a bound volume, economics notwithstanding. All right, so that was Paco Roca, Wrinkles, something I read before, but the other 4 books, 2021 reads. Let's see if I have The Spanish Civil War. Yes, I think you're right. He's deserting from the Spanish Civil War. Thank you. All right. Next up, we have Alberto Breccia, who I'd heard a lot about. So at the beginning of the live stream, I was saying, well, sometimes I haven't heard of people, etc. Now that I think about it, that's not true for any of these, but it does happen sometimes, and sometimes I haven't known about people. But Breccia is one of those people that you hear about, but there's nothing to buy. At least that was the case in English, and that was the case where we were here. So here in India, whenever you heard about it, would have to be, you've got to find a PDF or find a digital copy, which I don't really do. I can't read. I don't enjoy reading digitally, and particularly not in one of those low-res PDFs. And anyway, the screen reading thing of a printed book is just not for me. So for me, a lot of European works that either have not been translated into English or were translated into English a long time ago, and those editions are out of print, they become unattainable. So when I heard that the Breccia library was going to be published by Fantagraphics, and they were going to bring out all of Breccia's work, I was very excited. I love Fantagraphics, and I love it when they do these kind of things. I made a video on the Jacques Tardy library from Fantagraphics, because it's all Fantagraphics, and without Fantagraphics, I wouldn't have been able to read Tardy, among many other creators. So I was very excited about Mort's Cinder, which was going to be, I think, the first book that Fantagraphics brought out. And it launched, and I was traveling, and I saw it in a bookstore. I was like, my bags are already full. I'll just buy it when I come back home. I must have forgotten about it for what, and then it went out of print, or it wasn't available. It's that same old story, So sometimes people say, they talk about buyer's regret, and it's like, I have the opposite. I have the non-buying regret. I have not gotten something because I decided to wait. I mean, imagine if I got something and then the price fell. I mean, how much of a regret is that really? But not being able to get your hands on it. Anyway, once again, I was very happy that this became available again. I don't know if it was reprinted. Let me check the impression line on this copy that I ended up... Oh, well, now of course I'm going to have trouble finding even the copyright page. Oh, well, I'll look it up and see later. I say, and I keep looking. Because, yeah, there we go. It's the first edition. What impression is it? Oh, they don't have an impression number. That's odd. Anyway, I think it's a reprint, or I think it's a second printing. I was very happy to get it because a lot of people had read it, and a lot of people had gotten this edition and talked about it very positively, and I was waiting. So it was this year that I was finally able to get my hands on it. In case you're not familiar with this particular edition, it has this soft cover. It's very strange. It's like a baby's bath book. There's this little podgy things with ducks. I don't know why they decided to go for it, but it's unusual. It's interesting. It definitely makes for a unique experience when reading the book. It is white, which is something that can get dirty, but it just looks so beautiful from the cover itself. Very attractive packaging. But when you start reading it, that's when it really goes to the next level. This is spectacular stuff. Completely up to the hype, in my humble opinion. There is always a danger when people talk about something with such reverence, but this is anyone I think can see just from the art itself what significant work it is. And I'm not an art major or any kind of an expert, and even I can look and see at the variety of techniques that are being used. It's not just one style and it's not even one style per story. There are a number of stories in here, and they do vary, but they vary within the story as well. And it's Breccia sort of. It feels, of course, this is not the way, but it feels like he's showing off on every single panel, on every single page. It takes me a minute to, I go back and start reading the story again because I stopped reading the words because I was looking at the art and looking at the way it goes across the page. But it's fine because when I'm going back over it now there's a tone, there's an atmosphere, which I think happens as soon as you open the pages. You get into that, and that's what you're seeing, and that's the world you're in. Any kind of describing the stories in Mort Cinder, about Mort Cinder, I think would be a little unfair, because it is possible for this book as well as another, Perramus, it is possible to actually encapsulate this as or to describe it in the most genre terms. You can make it sound like an absolute potboiler, depending on the phrasing you use. And I'm trying to be careful here not to spoil stuff for people who haven't read it. But you could describe this, or the stories in this, in a variety of ways. You could use a variety of genre descriptions. You could use a lot of plot points, and you could say this happens and this happens and this happens, and someone will think that you're talking about a pulp B movie, or you're talking about a big Hollywood, big budget sci-fi historical. It's incredible, but the reason why one shouldn't talk about it that way, which is why I'm so elegantly avoiding doing that, is because that's not really what the stories are about. The stories are using those kind of familiar, I don't want to say tropes, but perhaps tropes and plot points and things like that. It's using that as a vehicle for experimenting with art and sequential narrative, and using it as a vehicle to say some very interesting things about governments, about people, about institutions, about the people who resist. And again, this is a theme that comes up in a humongous way in Perramus, but Mort Cinder is absolutely, you can read it as a potboiler, you can, but just the way that when I was reading Corto Maltese, I got a sense of Hugo Pratt, like giving his view on things, whether it was about nationalism or whether it was about borders and customs or things like that. You got the feeling that there was a universal view which kind of poo-pooed these stupid little things like countries and police and Coast Guard or what have you. And Mort Cinder feels very much like that, very different from Corto Maltese, but that I get a feeling of what the authors over here, it's Hector German Osterheld, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but you definitely get that political tone, that I don't want to call it a polemic, but there is a point that the authors want to make. There is a point that they want to have beyond the pot-boiling plot of this man who cannot be killed. It's not just the thrills of this adventure. And that extra part of it, I'm sure I am not getting any of the political references. I'm not getting anything about the time or the governments. As Argentinian authors, I know that there is dictatorship and a sort of, I know very vaguely, but I don't know what the context of a particular reference or a particular thing may be. And it doesn't matter. And I do think that if you do, it will be even richer. But that is not to say that not knowing it, because I'm the perfect example of not knowing, makes it in any way poor. And I was just captivated by it. This is a fantastic book. It does demand something from you. It's not the reason why one shouldn't put it across as one of those genre descriptions is because it's not a popcorn read that you can turn half your brain off and somehow just get the gist of. You do have to work at it. Perhaps not as much as you have to work on Perramus, but it rewards that kind of work. It rewards that examination. It rewards allowing yourself to go into it. And I think that's also the kind of thing that will reward rereading it and revisiting it. This is one of those books that when you come back to it, you're going to find something else. You're going to find something more. And if you're different, it'll be different. It's one of those pieces of art. So highly recommend Mort, Cinder, which I thought was fantastic. The one that I've referred to, the one that I read after that was Perramus, which is a huge brick of a book, but it's actually so the subtitle is Perramus, the city and sorry, I got distracted. The City and Oblivion. And this is a collection of 4 books. So I think it was originally published as 4 books, Perramus 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is published in 1 volume by Fantagraphics, doing another terrific job in production, but once again the production is, come for the production, stay that's not true, you come for the story. And if anything, this takes Mort, Cinder to another level altogether. I know that's a very weird way of putting it, but you've got the same mixture of techniques. You've got what I'm guessing is not just pen, ink, charcoal, but things that I'm sure are photographs rendered into the art in a particular way. Photocopies, maybe. I've seen, I think someone told me in my unboxing Galactus video what that technique is called, because Kirby was using it for his satellites and space stations and things like that. There's all that here, but a lot more. And the, what would you call this, expressionistic art over here is, again, it varies from story to story, because each story, it doesn't feel, they are united by the character of Perramus, a man with no memory, shades of Mort, Cinder over there, but each of the stories is completely unrecognizable from the other. If you didn't have certain recurring characters and a vaguest setup, you would not believe that these are the same universe, or it's the same world, and the kind of story changes from each one. And so this is within one book. If you don't like one, try the other. If you don't like the other, try that. But they're also unified by not just the virtuoso art style, which I don't have the words to properly describe how the unfolding of stories like this happen. But we're just looking at art because that's the best thing that we can do over here. But they're hallucinatory, they're dreamlike. These stories have a kind of nervous energy to them, which is quite unsettling, but it also works within the larger structure of what they're trying to say, again, about authority, about political authority, about social institutions, and really about people and how people interact with each other and what they're making of their world. But they're actually making the world, or the world is becoming the things that we make it, and our governments, our institutions make it, represented in the art style, having the kind of adjustments it does. It's really spectacular. I do not believe, just like Mort, Cinder, actually more than Mort, Cinder, I do not believe that I've got it all. Yeah, I don't believe I've understood everything there is to understand in this, not even close. But I also find that to be a wonderful thing, because it is a thing that I know that I would like to return to. I know that I will forget, because there's just no way to keep in mind everything. I'll keep in mind the impression that it makes on me, and I'll keep in mind some of the things, but there's no way that you can actually keep in mind. And the kind of literariness, the density of this, and I don't mean that in the writing or the prose, I mean in the whole work, is brilliant. It makes Alan Moore stuff. I mean, you understand where they're coming from, and I think in a number of different conversations, I've heard people talk about now Frank Miller and his influences, and Breccia is often cited as an influence. Carlos Munoz is another person that I discovered this year, thanks to some of the wonderful people in the chat over here, because I can see this, but I can see also that storytelling of where you take literary characters and you put them into your story. That stuff, we've almost become used to it by now. It's almost passé, and I think even when Alan Moore did it with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen at one point, or other stuff before that, even then we had seen stuff like that before. But over here, when that is there, it is so much about the politics of this story and what it's trying to say that I found that to be it makes everything else look very shallow. It makes it look like, oh, you just wanted to put whatever, Tom Sawyer in your story, so you did, and what's the real significance of doing that? Now, I'm not obviously dissing Alan Moore, I mean, and I love League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but this is a different level of doing that kind of stuff, where the storytelling and is made completely new, even if you are repurposing a person from real life or repurposing a fictional character. And as I said, I'm sure there are dozens, if not more, that I don't even know about, and so I don't understand that that's also a reference, but it's so rich and so textured that makes absolutely no difference to me. So yes, Perramus, check this out. Again, a book that if you put on your shelves, you will keep it on your shelves, and you will be rewarded coming back to it later in life as well, I think. Okay. All right, Gore Vidal in the comments giving a lot more context that I cannot. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was very intrigued with the role that Borges plays in Perramus, and there is obviously he's turned around from his known political views to the political views that he has to have in order to be, what is he, like Charlie from Charlie's Angels, or no, Bosley, the mission leader, good stuff over there. And the final Breccia that I got was the Eternaut, 1969. It's this thin, and maybe, I'm not sure, and people in the chat or comments later can tell me, maybe I'm the only person who's read this and not the original Eternaut. And I know that is one of the greatest comics of all time, and I know it's fantastic, and I'm but it's always been out of print. I've never been able to get my hands on it until it was reprinted recently, and it's been purchased for me by a very kind friend who is in the chat right now, but I don't have that copy, so I still haven't read it. And to be perfectly honest, I did get an opportunity to read it. Someone in the Discord pointed out that it was available on an Indian site, and it was impossible for it to be available. It was available for about $35 or whatever the list price is of that Fantagraphics edition before it was reprinted. And it's been out of print for years and not available. So I was like, there's no way this order will actually get fulfilled. And I ordered it, and that order did get fulfilled, and the Eternaut was delivered to my house, and it was a pirated copy. It was a photocopied, stuck together, very badly glued together, and then put into something that they had tried to replicate the format, so it was the right format, but they printed the pages incorrectly, so it wasn't landscape format. If you understand what I mean, the landscape pages were pasted this way, so you had to open the book like this, and you couldn't open the book anyway. And I still read the first 30 pages in that format, turning each page upside down. But I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it. So I returned it. I got a refund, but I had no Eternaut. So that's my tragic tale with that. So I didn't get to read that. I'm going to read it. I'm waiting for that. But in the meantime, this is a famously cancelled Eternaut, right? So this is like your Firefly version of Eternaut. It's just, it got cancelled. Readers didn't like it. They didn't like the artistic experimentation, or they didn't like the manner in which the story was being told. They found it, I don't know what it is. They found it obtuse, and therefore the newspaper, or maybe it was, I think it was a newspaper, the newspaper that was publishing it decided to cancel it. So it never got to run, and the authors finished the story. They finished the story in summary form. So you literally have a couple of chapters which are the way the original Eternaut is, and then they summarize 3/4 of the book in 4 pages. So, it's never going to be anything like a full story. It's still a terrific, in the first couple of chapters, you get to see more Breccia, and you get to see more storytelling done in very unique ways. But it remains a what if sort of thing. It's so unfinished. Well, again, unfinished isn't the right word, because at least they got to finish it. But it raises an interesting question for me. Is like, should certain things just be left? If something's going to be unfinished, let it be unfinished. Would these 2 chapters, without the rushed summary, because it's so tonally different. I mean, I know you've got that art. The art is great until the very end, but it's not the story. The story didn't go from having dialogue between people to, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. So it feels too jarring for me, and it's the kind of thing that makes me think that, yes, leave things incomplete, and we as readers will fantasize about what would have been, how it could have been. We'll extrapolate, and we'll draw those imaginary pages, and it'll be much better than something that just feels like such an amputation. I'm still glad to have this book, and I knew that this was an incomplete story, and I kind of had an idea about that. This is just because Alberto Breccia, I'm in the zone. It's 2021. I've read Mort, Cinder. I've read Perramus. Let's go. I know there is Dracula by Breccia out by Fantagraphics now, and I would have jumped on it if it wasn't for Earl Grey and his video. And then he said, no, I'm not saying you shouldn't go for it. You should definitely go for it. But he had a color comparison, and he was talking about... but yes, as someone who hasn't read and doesn't have like a nice German edition of it, I will eventually get it and read it. So that's on my list. But my enthusiasm was a little dampened over there. All right, so that is wow. Okay, 1 hour, 2 authors. Not bad. I mean, given my tendencies and the way I do run on, I was afraid that this might go crazy, but I think this means that we're more or less on schedule and moving along at a fairly decent clip. Hello to everyone in the chat that I didn't get to say hello to at the beginning of the live stream. Good to see everyone here, everyone talking amongst themselves. That's great. I don't need to do anything about it. My ideal situation. All right, moving along. The next person I want to talk about, and I did talk about one thing in one of my previous live streams, which was I read the books you asked me to. And that live stream was a selection of books that viewers and subscribers, people writing comments, people sending me emails had recommended and say, you must read this. And particularly when they say, if you love this, you must read this, or have you ever tried this? I'd really like to know what you think of it, because there are so many differing opinions, etc., etc. First of all, it's very flattering that anyone would want to get my opinion on something, but I've really discovered so many gems because of all of you, that my collection is, when people, and I think I said this in that other live stream, when people tell me that, oh, you know, I've spent all this money because of you, I'm like, yeah, well, it works the other way around as well. I've spent a lot of money because of you. So the book I talked about over there, I want to talk about again, is Megahex by Simon Hanselmann. And Simon Hanselmann, again, is one of those people that I've heard about. I've seen, this witch, this cat. I've seen them, but I had not read anything apart from maybe something in an anthology. So there are a couple of anthologies, like the Best American Comics. There was a McSweeney's anthology a long time ago, and those early Best American and McSweeney's volume were very... and I'm going to talk about them again, were very formative for me. And I keep saying this because of how many people they introduced me to, how many people I got to know about because of those anthologies, and then sought out works of theirs and things like that. And I think, I'm not sure. Anyway, Megahex, I talked about in that live stream, was an incredible read. It was astonishing. Not primarily, but it was astonishing in large part because of how unexpectedly appealing and unexpectedly affecting I found it. It is one of the rudest books I've ever read. The behavior in it is inexcusable in many ways, and yet there is empathy, and yet there is insight into characters who you would not expect. And the art style is something that really works for me, but I can see some people not being interested in all of this. And maybe you will know better than me, but it seems to me that this initially could have been a reference to a children's cartoon or a children's comic or something. There's something about the witch and the cat and the owl. Maybe I'm just misremembering, but this is sort of I won't say subversive take, but this is just taking those kind of characters who would be right at home in a children's cartoon. A witch and her cat lived with an owl in a house, and then making them some of the most... I'm trying to think of the polite words over here. Some of the most depraved. They've got addiction issues. They've got substance issues. They've got codependency and emotional manipulation. The kind of behavior that I think even in your worst TV shows, sitcoms, people wouldn't want to go to that level because it would just be too alienating. It would be too off and too ugly for people to look at. And I think the comics are close, but first of all, they're comics, so it's not quite the same thing as looking at film, and it allows them to cross boundaries and break taboos in a way that maybe you can't. But it is incredibly affecting. Once you let it work its magic on you, I think it is possible to be put off within a first couple of pages or even one or two stories. But I think if you continue, it sinks its teeth into you, and after that, it's something else altogether. I wouldn't say this is for everyone, but I do think it is fantastic. And Simon Hanselmann was not someone I had any familiarity with, but because I'd heard people talk about him and because I'd had people recommend their work, I picked this up. I loved it, so I wanted to get more. And so after Megahex, I read One More Year, another hardcover from Fantagraphics, Meg and Mogg go to Amsterdam, which is it. Meg and Mogg go to Amsterdam is taking again that sort of bad behavior and your expectations of it now of what will happen if they're in Amsterdam, and turning that on its head as well. Very clever, very interesting, and Bad Gateway, which I think may be the most mature of these works, although I don't mean to imply that there are works that are immature. You can certainly translate them as immature because of the scatological nature of the humor or the situations, the kind of incredibly uncompromising way that it looks at the dingiest things. They're all, I think, mature works, but there is a definite progression through them. And I'm interested now because I don't know if I read them in the right order. So, again, you can let me know. I read Megahex, One Bad Year, Meg and Mogg Go to Amsterdam, and Bad Gateway. I think that might be the right order, or I may have switched Amsterdam and Bad Gateway, but it doesn't matter. I really don't think it matters. I think it's fine for there to be a timeline, and I think it's fine for there to be a chronology within this universe, although sometimes it's a little odd, but that's my failing as a reader, not in Simon Hanselmann's. But in any order you read this, if you're willing to take the chance, this is some of the most lovely I feel odd using that word, but some of the most affecting work I've read on those topics I was talking about, particularly depression. I think it's difficult to write about such things with genuineness, and it's difficult to write about these things by being honest and trying to portray things honestly. And there's a lot of machinery in the depiction of these things that manipulate the truth of the experience. Now, I'm not speaking from personal experience, but I know that a lot of things ring false. And it's interesting to me that something so outrageous and so transgressive is so much more effective than a lot of other things about the honesty of its depiction, the honesty of its storytelling. It's not plot-oriented stuff, but if you're interested in the plot-oriented stuff, you'll have some of that as well. If I was to summarize what happens in any of these stories, it would sound like a riot, or it would sound like a nightmare, depending on your tastes. But you would definitely. But again, I think like those other comics, you would definitely be interested, but that's not what you're going to get when you read it. You're not going to say, oh, this is when they get locked into a supermarket and create chaos. Yes, but that's not what you're going to get from the story. And that's something I think as I was reading this, that progressed more and more. So one of the one of the books of this year that everyone is talking about and people have really praised is Simon Hanselmann's Crisis Zone, the book that came out of the lockdown. And I wanted to make sure that I had read all of these before I got to Crisis Zone. I haven't ordered Crisis Zone yet, but I'm definitely going to. And it's the kind of thing where in this case I don't mind there being that praise, because I've got all of this now under my belt, and I know I have a sense of Hanselmann. I'm not saying it's an educated sense or a comprehensive sense, but I'm okay with people praising his next book to the roof. Even if I don't like it as much, it's okay. It can't be bad. It can't be bad. I don't think so. I mean, if it's bad, I'll be very, very surprised. But I'm looking forward to that as another meaty, wonderful read and continuation. And I was looking at the chat, and Edward says that because of my confusion about the order, that it might just be it's another day, another adventure. And absolutely, that's what I mean, is that I don't think, if you're really following things along maybe you'll say that, oh, they've moved out of that apartment, or is it this house? It might be that kind of stuff, but it really is sort of timeless, sort of in a bubble, and you can read them in any order. At least these ones are concerned. So I don't have Crisis Zone yet, but I did get Seeds and Stems by Simon Hanselmann, which comes in this urine-colored dust jacket, which I do not believe to be a coincidence. And this is a collection of, I think, I haven't read this yet, but this is a collection of the earliest Meg and Mogg strips. So this is a later publication. This is, I think, something that was published in 2021. Or was it published in 2020? This is the before Crisis Zone. This was the most recent Simon Hanselmann, but it's his oldest work. This is stuff that I think he self-published, or was in zines, or was in other zines, and you can definitely tell, well, definitely is a strong word, you can tell that it's earlier work, but it's also interesting to even superficially note that there's not that much straying from these things. If you look at many other long-running comics and series, you may find the art style to get more polished and smoother, or as the artists learn more about shape, or as they are more interested in other things. But this is, I mean, there are obviously adjustments and changes, but this is pretty close to how things look right now. Of course, the color scheme is different. This is, I'm guessing some of this must have been mimeographed zines. This is a wonderful collection just to have that variety of colors and shapes and layouts. The size of the panels varies from story to story. The color of the pages obviously varies from story to story. Great stuff. I haven't really gotten into this, so I'm thinking it'll be interesting for me to do Seeds and Stems, which is the earliest Simon Hanselmann work, and then read Crisis Zone, which is the most recent Simon Hanselmann work, as sort of bookends to my 2021 deep dive discovery of Hanselmann. So yeah, Seeds and Stems coming up next, hopefully to be followed by Crisis Zone. Excellent. Tommy has a question. Says, which of Hanselmann's books would you recommend as the first to read? I don't think you can go wrong with any, but start with Megahex. That's where I started, and it worked out fine for me. I do think you could start with anyone, but there's something about Meg and Mogg in Amsterdam and Bad Gateway that are not. It's not about like having to read something before, story-wise or character-wise. It's something about the length of those stories that I think reading the shorter works and reading the collections first is a good thing. It's kind of like watching the filmmaker you like, start with the short films and then get to feature-length films. It's a bad thing, but it's a bad analogy, but it's somewhat similar to that. So you can definitely start with Bad Gateway. I think you can definitely start with any of these works, but start with Megahex, Another Bad Year, and then I think, just like I don't know which order Amsterdam and Bad Gateway are supposed to be. But also the good thing about Megahex is you'll know whether this is for you or not. So I think you don't have to go. All right. Let's see. What are we going to do? What are we going up next? All right. So the final person that I want to talk about today, and there's a reason why I've saved him for last, is John Porcellino. Oh no, one of my books isn't here. That's too bad. It's by my bedside. I was going through it again in what passes for preparation for these live streams, but over here I have From Lone Mountain, Map of My Heart. Focus. There you go. And King Cat Classix, all from Drawn and Quarterly in paperback editions. And these are collections of John Porcellino's mini comic zine called King Cat Comics, which he's been doing. Oh, come on. There we go. There you go. You've got the years over there. So Drawn and Quarterly, the best of King Cat. This is a selection. He's been doing this for 30 years, I believe, at this point of time. And this is finally a collection of his comics that we can get our hands on, because Porcellino is another one of those people that I was introduced to from one of the best American comics anthologies. The story was a diary of a mosquito abatement man, and it was a short story about autobiographical, I assumed, although it could have been fictional, I had no idea. It was about a man who worked as a mosquito abatement man, and he was going off into the middle of nowhere, and there was this industrial factory, and he was supposed to go and fumigate the place, and it was empty because it had to be fumigated or something like that. It was just a story of a man putting this cloud of smoke in this city in the desert, which is just pipes and chimneys, and it was such an unusual story because I couldn't get it out of my head. I had no idea why I had that feeling. There was something about that story, about that man doing the thing and then getting lost in a sort of mystical almost experience of, is there anybody else in the world? Is there, where am I? It's very hard to describe. And the art style was this. So to me, it was astonishing how that car going up the road in that way. I mean, this is not that story, but it's like this. This is how the cars look. This is how the roads look. This is how the people look. And I couldn't get it out of my head. It was such a transcendent experience because that artist was able to write about a transcendent experience. And honestly speaking, when people write about transcendent experiences, whether it's from hallucinogenic drugs or whether it's from an epiphany they've had, it tends to be hit or miss with me, because there's a famous quote, I don't remember by whom, but somebody told me this, that they said that James Joyce ruined more good, young, promising writers than anyone else, because once James Joyce put epiphany into his stories, everyone wanted an epiphany in their stories, and so what would have been a fine story would have an epiphany crammed into it, and you must have an epiphany. And so therefore, sort of like Easy Rider did with motorcycle movies. So I'm wary about epiphanies. I'm wary about experiences in which you cross over, and no matter how powerful it was for the person, it's not like I doubt the honesty, although sometimes I do doubt the honesty of the people writing it. Like, I don't think they've ever had a drink in their life if they're writing about people being drunk behaving like that. But in spite of that, it doesn't matter, because some of these guys are very famous poets and writers. That drug trip thing doesn't sound interesting to me. It must have been very interesting for you to go through. I'm very happy for you, but the writing, that thing doesn't do it for me. So the fact that something drawn like this, lettered like this, and boxed like this had that effect on me was incredible. So I was like, oh, where is this from? And it said it's from King Cat Comics number 62 or something like that. And I was just like, how am I going to get my hands on this comic? Thanks a lot, Anthology. And I didn't know. So I looked up King Cat comics, and are there anthologies, are there collections of these mini comics that he's been putting out there? And I knew, and then at a certain point of time I knew that was possible because I had seen collections of people's early work, or even collection of zines and things like that, and a lot of other artists, writer artists, people like Seth, people like Adrian Tomina, people like Joe, Matt, and Chester Brown. They all had, magazines they would publish, with Drawn and Quarterly or Fantagraphics or something like that, but then they would get put into books. So I was like, I'm sure there are things like that for John Porcellino as well, and they weren't, or at least none that I could find. So it was a very frustrating thing for me to not have that. And I think there might have been a collection or two where it was out of print and it was so expensive, so on and so forth. So when I heard and when I saw that Drawn and Quarterly had started putting them all together in like this, so this is 19, here we go. So the King Cat Classics are like Hanselmann Seeds and Stems. These are the earliest stories. This is 1989 to 1996. So it's not comprehensive. It says the best of, so it's selections from. So this is 1989 to 1996 are the classics. You've got, then you've got Map of My Heart, which is 1996 to 2000. You're not going to see it. 2002, take my word for it. And 2003 to 2007 from Lone Mountain. There is another book that's called Perfect Example, and that is a book-length memoir. And that was published, I think now I left it, it was published in 2007. So that technically is after From Lone Mountain Stories. So the way that you would read them if you wanted to be chronological is you would go with the King Cat Classics, Map of My Heart, From Lone Mountain, and then get to that. That's the order in which they were published. Now that has also been reprinted by Drawn and Quarterly, and it's got the same. I wish I hadn't left it, but it looks elegant because they've got that design and they put it all, and they look good. But again, you don't have to read these chronologically. And enough about the books and the history and the things like that. Who is John Porcellino? What does John Porcellino do? Here is a comic in which he goes out for a walk and he sees a possum, and he comes back to the office and thinks, oh, I should make a comic about that possum. And then the final panel is, that's it. That would be the whole comic, possum. And that's the comic. And it seems, I'm purposely putting it across this way because I want you to go like, what is the big deal about that? Or one-page little things. All of this for me is poetry. It's beautiful comics. It's some of the most beautiful comics I've ever read in my whole life. He has a way of talking about existence and looking at life in a manner that I find to be almost unparalleled in comics, in fiction, in film, and part of it is definitely this art style. This is he could do the same plot, even the same page layout and the same panels with a different art style. It wouldn't be what this is. What this is honesty. And it's a certain kind of self-awareness which isn't about extensive vocabulary, either in words or in lines. It's about simplicity. And that's what makes it so honest. His self-awareness, his examination. A lot of these stories are things that he may have done in certain years, but they're telling stories from his childhood. And then you have another story which is just about what happened yesterday, or something that happened right now. Then there'll be another story about when he was a kid. So they flip back and forth in time. But what they are united, I think all of his stories, no matter where in them you're taking, what they're united by is one of the most loving depictions of being alive, of existing in this world. Sometimes it is with nature, and there's a lot of that, about hiking, about walking, about being outside, about having the sky above you and the grass underneath your feet, and all of that sounds a little pastoral, especially for an urban person like me. And it didn't matter. I didn't find it cloying. I didn't find it sentimental. I found it to be very honest. And that's what I found so refreshing about all of this. And what the incredible thing is, I think, like Simon Hanselmann, you can see it from the very beginning, from his very earliest stories. Even if his art style changes, it doesn't change that much. He stops crowding the panels with as many words as he has over here, and I think the lettering, but it, if I go to the last thing that we have over here, it's just the slightest bits of adjustments that create the look that he's got later. He's just been able to continue to use that space with just the fewest lines in order to do what he wants to do. And really, as I said, what he wants to do is he wants to celebrate existence, and he wants to celebrate his own existence. And I have never seen someone celebrate their own existence in this way. It is so touching, the honesty he has in exploring himself without any kind of like, oh, I'm going to be really scathing, I'm going to really be incisive, and I'm going to grind myself down. It's something that he has when looking at himself that is kind and that is generous and that is accepting of himself. But the thoughts that he's having at the moment of his creation, or at the moment of creating this comic, you don't know where that is. You don't know whether the thoughts you're seeing are what he had as an 18-year-old, because he's writing a story about being an 18-year-old, or the thoughts he has about him as an 18-year-old. And that's funny, because I think in most stories, it's one or the other. It's very distinct. You're like, I was foolish, or I thought nothing could hurt me, blah, blah, blah. It'll be very clear that it's the kid or the younger thought. Or it'll be like, looking back, I can see how foolish I was, or looking back, I really miss, or like that's the voice of the older person. It's never really confusing. But over here, you're sure that you're talking about that character over there, but the manner in which that character interacts with the world around them, and not just nature, that's another thing that I wanted to say. Some of it is about cars, some of it is about people, some of it is about grocery stores, and at the same time, it's not Harvey Pekar or Chris Ware, although I think John Porcellino is similar to Chris Ware in some ways, even though they seem so far apart. They're both interested in silences, and they're both interested in spaces, and they're both interested in like the pain of living. There are in some stories over here, there are things that have to do with depression. They're all autobiographical pieces, so they have to do with his struggles and what he went through and how he dealt with things. And there's a lot about his life, but not all of it is in the comics. And that was another wonderful thing about these 3 volumes, at least, and particularly in Map of My Heart, where what's happening in his life is given to you in the introductory letters, not letters to the editor, the letter that he writes to his readers, and he catches them up on what's been happening in his life since the last issue came out. And then the comics start, and then sometimes there's prose and he uses mixtures, but that's where you get where he's now moved to Denver. Oh, now he's moved back from Denver to Illinois. Oh, now he's getting a divorce and his marriage is falling apart. And then you've got comics that are about 10 years ago or 5 years ago or last week, and then some years later you'll get a thing about a relationship, and you're like, I remember that from the letter he wrote me several years ago. That experience of having his autobiography come through in this format alongside the comics, I thought was a marvelous experience. And I think it's a no-brainer that Ron and Quarterly replicated all of those. So here's the cover for one of his. Look, yeah, there's the cover for one of his issues. There's some notes that he has. So if this issue has a groundhog, he's going to write about the groundhog. He's going to write about botany. He's going to write about plants. And he's going to sign off. And then the comics are going to start. And then you'll get to the next comic. Now, I know it says the best of King Cat comics. So I don't know if that means that certain issues have been left out. Although these feel full as zines. But... or if it means that certain parts of the issues have been left out. So I think when I was going numerically, it felt to me, I don't know, maybe I stopped paying attention. I thought it was 48, 49, 50, 51. I think all the numbers are there, but there might be things, because they say the best of. That's the only reason why. But you will not feel anything is incomplete. And a very, very unique comics reading experience, very spiritual, if I can use that word without sounding hokey. But you know, I'm the kind of person who, when that's a very spiritual book, I find that to be very hokey. But this is not that. This is I think it's okay to call this spiritual, because it's really about the spirit, and it's really about that human existence. I'm not doing a good job talking about this, which is why I shall return definitely to John Porcellino in a different video when I've been able to create a better sense of what it is. But I would say that if you don't have to have everything look a particular way, and if you don't have to have everything be about something, you could do a lot worse than check out these books. And Perfect Example, which is, as I said, it's a memoir, it's a fuller length one, but it is about something that happened to him. It's about the year. It's about the year. Is it a full year? It's a full year between him finishing high school and him starting college. And it's that 1 year. And it's in some ways just like any teen drama or teen TV show set in America. You understand this sort of small town, big town, going into the city, hanging out, house parties, making out, all of those things, kind of stuff that you'll see in Black Hole, but done in a completely, oh my goodness, it's the absolute opposite of Black Hole, where it's the same kind of thing about a person, and of course it's a memoir, but this idea of being comfortable in your own skin, being comfortable around people, being comfortable around your friends or your family, and how difficult that is. It's very well done. I love all of these books. I think I started, and I didn't read these in order, so I didn't read them in the chronological sequence. I started with Map of My Heart, because Noah Van Sciver said, read Map of My Heart, and that's why I said, okay, so it was great. From Lone Mountain was brilliant, and I went backwards and read King Cat Classics, because this was the one that I bought later or something like that. So again, you don't need to read these in order. You don't need to read one in order to read the other. I love all of them, and I don't know if there are more Porcellino books coming. I hope so. This only gets us to 2007, and Perfect Example was published in 2007. So I'm hoping for many more. This is fantastic stuff. I love having been able to add these to my... not all of his issues have been collected, Samuel says. Thank you. Got it. Just wonderful, brilliant, beautiful books. If you haven't ever... if you're like me and have never heard of Porcellino before that, I'd be interested in what other people think about Porcellino. Because, again, I don't think I read... Let me put it this way, or better way. I don't think anything that I read and love and celebrate is for everyone, and that's kind of foolish to think so. And I don't think if someone doesn't enjoy something that I've enjoyed, that means they're foolish. I do like the conversation. I do like people telling me why they didn't like something. But with Porcellino, I'd be very curious, because I'm still trying to process and put into words what about his comics affect me the way they do. Honesty, simplicity, they don't seem to do it, I guess, they don't seem to do it justice. But I think, especially from the point of view, for at least from a starting thing, because we've looked at Breccia, and we've looked at, well, Simon has, well, hold on one second, all right, I was trying to find one, but when you look at Paco Roca, you can look at that art and you wonder, how can this clean art and this, tell a war story, but tell a story about old people with Alzheimer's, and you're like, this is how you do it. Everything can find its way. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be like there's only one way to tell a story, or there's only one kind of style that fits a particular sort of thing. But even more so, I think people often tell me that art really matters to me as far as comics is concerned. If it's a visual medium, that's what people like saying. And so it's a visual medium, and if the visuals are not good, I'm not interested. And it's a tough thing for me to talk about, because first of all, what do you mean by good is always my first question. But I think from now on, I just want to give them John Porcellino comics. Now, like, you tell me, do you think this is good? And if you tell me that this is not good art, I'm like, I don't want you to tell me whether it's good art or not. I want you to tell me whether it's a good comic or not. And tell me if that comic could have been that good with any other art, which I don't think it can. And I think there's something there. I don't know what that is, but I'll have to try to figure that out. But I think that's the end of the live stream, because I've reached the end of this pile of books, and I still forgot to bring one with me, Perfect Example by John Porcellino. But yeah, these are 4 creators I really enjoyed watching. I really enjoyed reading, but I enjoyed discovering them. I enjoyed going down that rabbit hole and seeing what else is out there, what else do they have, and I'd really love to continue doing that with these creators. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining our first live stream of the year. Hopefully there'll be plenty more to come. Happy New Year once again. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye.